The story begins in a small mountain town surrounded by endless green hills and tall pine trees. Life there was simple, but sometimes cruel rumors and jokes could travel faster than the wind. Clara Bennett, a young woman of 20, was known for her quiet beauty and kind heart. She lived with her aunt and uncle after losing her parents to illness when she was just a child. Though she was humble, some people in town found amusement in teasing her because she was poor and shy. One summer afternoon, a group of townspeople played what they thought would be a harmless prank. They told Clara she was chosen to marry a mountain man named Samuel Dyer, a rugged recluse who lived deep in the mountains, known for his rough manners and solitary life. The people said it was arranged through the church and that Samuel was coming down from the hills with his family in a wagon to meet his new bride. Clara was terrified at first. She didn't understand why she had been chosen, and she didn't want to marry a stranger, but the townsfolk insisted, pretending it was an official order, even showing her a forged letter with the pastor's signature. Out of fear and confusion, Clara obeyed. Her aunt, too frightened to go against what seemed like a command, helped her pack her few belongings: a small dress, her mother's old locket, and a faded blanket. When the wagon finally arrived, Clara stood trembling by the dusty road. The wagon was large, covered in worn canvas and pulled by 2 tired horses. In it sat 2 men, brothers as it turned out. One was Samuel, the so-called mountain man. His face was weathered by years of harsh winters, his hands rough and scarred. The other was his younger brother Thomas, a man in his late 20s with thoughtful eyes and a calm, gentle manner. Clara's heart raced as she stood before them. Samuel looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "So you're the girl," he said flatly. "Didn't expect this." His voice was deep, almost cold. Thomas, however, noticed Clara's trembling hands and the tears forming in her eyes. He stepped forward and spoke softly. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Clara tried to answer, but her voice broke. She didn't know what to say. Everyone in town was watching from a distance, whispering and laughing quietly. She felt trapped and humiliated, but she couldn't run. Where would she go? The brothers exchanged a look. Samuel shrugged and muttered, "We came all this way. Might as well get it done." But Thomas's jaw tightened. Something didn't feel right to him. The young woman before him looked too frightened, too confused. He asked one of the onlookers what was going on, but they just chuckled and said, "Oh, it's just a little joke. The preacher will sort it out later." Thomas's eyes darkened with anger. A joke? He looked back at Clara, realizing she had been the victim of a cruel prank. The color drained from her face as she clutched her small bag, standing alone and helpless under the burning sun. "Sam," Thomas said quietly, "this isn't right." She didn't agree to this. "Look at her, she's scared." Samuel shrugged again, clearly tired of the situation. "Then you deal with it," he said, turning away. "I didn't come here for nonsense." He climbed back into the wagon, muttering under his breath. Thomas turned to Clara. "You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to," he said softly. "Who told you you had to marry my brother?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. They said it was ordered by the pastor," she whispered. "I thought it was true. I didn't want to shame my family." Thomas's heart ached as he listened. He could see how deeply she had been hurt, not only by the lie but by the laughter of the crowd behind her. Without a second thought, he took off his hat and faced the people. "You should be ashamed," he said firmly. "You call this a joke? You humiliated an innocent woman for your amusement." The laughter faded. A few people looked away, embarrassed. Others mumbled excuses. But Thomas didn't stop there. He walked back to Clara and said, "You're coming with us, not to marry anyone, but to get you away from these cruel people. You'll be safe until we can talk to the pastor ourselves." Clara hesitated, unsure whether to trust him, but something in his calm voice made her believe he meant no harm. She nodded slightly, and Thomas helped her climb into the wagon. Samuel frowned but didn't protest. He just flicked the reins and started the slow journey back toward the mountains. As they rode, Clara sat quietly beside Thomas, clutching her locket. The air grew cooler as they climbed higher into the hills, the forest closing in around them. She felt nervous but strangely peaceful, far from the laughter and whispers of the town. Thomas tried to make her comfortable, offering her water and a blanket. They stopped by a small stream to rest. Thomas gathered wood for a fire while Samuel went to check on their supplies. Clara sat by the water, watching the ripples dance across the surface. "You didn't have to help me," she said softly. Thomas smiled faintly. I couldn't stand by and watch something wrong happen, he replied. You deserve kindness, not mockery. His words touched her heart. For the first time that day, Clara felt safe. She looked at Thomas and saw a gentleness she had never known, a quiet strength that made her believe not all people were cruel. When night fell, they set up camp beneath the stars. Samuel kept his distance, still grumbling about wasted time, but Thomas stayed near Clara, making sure she was warm and had enough to eat. The firelight flickered on their faces, casting soft shadows across the forest floor. As she lay beneath the blanket, Clara thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the fear, the sudden kindness of a stranger. It all felt like a strange dream. She didn't know what awaited her in the morning, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same. And as Thomas sat quietly by the fire, keeping watch, he couldn't stop thinking about the young woman who had been treated so cruelly by others. Deep down, he knew this meeting was no accident. Fate had brought her into his life for a reason he didn't yet understand. The night was still and calm, the mountains whispering softly in the distance. And though neither of them knew what the future held, both Clara and Thomas felt that something unexpected, and perhaps beautiful, had just begun. The next morning, the sunlight slipped through the tall pine trees, casting golden rays on the small camp. Clara woke to the sound of birds singing and the soft crackle of a fire. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she remembered the wagon, the mountains, and the kindness of Thomas. She sat up slowly and saw him by the stream, washing a tin cup. Samuel was nearby, packing their supplies with his usual gruff expression. "Good morning," Thomas said gently, noticing she was awake. "Did you sleep all right?" Clara nodded shyly. "Yes, thank you." Her voice was soft, but there was a bit more strength in it now. She was beginning to feel safe around him, though the memory of the cruel joke still hurt. After a small breakfast of bread and dried fruit, they loaded the wagon and began their journey again. Samuel drove silently, while Thomas sat beside Clara in the back, making sure she was comfortable. The mountains around them grew higher and more beautiful as they climbed deeper into the wilderness. Streams sparkled beside the road, and the scent of pine filled the air. Thomas pointed toward the horizon. "See that ridge?" he said. "Our cabin is just beyond it. You'll be safe there until we can sort everything out." Clara smiled faintly. "It's beautiful here," she said. "I never thought I'd see a place like this." Thomas looked at her and saw how her eyes brightened when she spoke. "Maybe beauty finds us when we least expect it," he said quietly. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had started to dip behind the mountains. The cabin was small but sturdy, built of thick logs with a stone chimney. Smoke curled lazily from the top, and a garden of herbs and flowers grew by the side. Clara stepped out of the wagon, amazed by the peaceful surroundings. She could hear a small creek nearby and the wind whispering through the trees. "This will be your home for now," Thomas said, opening the wooden door. Inside, the cabin was simple. 2 beds, a small table, shelves lined with jars, and a warm fire burning in the hearth. Samuel put down the bags and muttered, "I'll go check the traps," before disappearing into the woods. Thomas smiled apologetically. "My brother isn't much for company," he said. "But he means no harm." Clara looked around the cozy room. It felt like a place where time moved slower, where wounds could heal quietly. She sat by the fire while Thomas prepared tea from dried herbs. The warmth filled the room, and for the first time in days, Clara felt her heart begin to settle. They talked as the evening deepened. Thomas told her about their life in the mountains, how he and Samuel had grown up here learning to hunt, build, and live off the land after their parents passed away. Clara listened with interest, her fear slowly turning into curiosity. When Thomas asked about her life, she hesitated at first, but his gentle tone encouraged her. She spoke about losing her parents young, about living with her strict aunt and uncle, and how lonely she often felt in the town. "I used to dream of a place where people were kind," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd find it up here." Thomas smiled. "Sometimes kindness hides in unexpected corners of the world," he replied. Over the next few days, Clara began to settle into a routine. She helped Thomas with small chores, fetching water, drying herbs, and cooking meals. She was surprised by how peaceful life in the mountains could be. The air was clean, the nights were full of stars, and the silence was gentle rather than cold. Thomas often found himself watching her with quiet admiration. Despite everything she had gone through, Clara smiled often and worked hard. There was a quiet strength in her that reminded him of spring flowers blooming through snow. One afternoon, while Clara was hanging laundry outside, Thomas came up carrying a small wooden box. "I made this for you," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a simple carved pendant shaped like a small bird. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. "Why a bird?" Thomas smiled. "Because you remind me of one. You were trapped in a cage of cruelty, but you didn't lose your spirit. Now you're free." Her eyes glistened with emotion. No one had ever said something so kind to her before. "Thank you, Thomas," she said softly. "You've given me more kindness than anyone ever has." That evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara noticed how peaceful the cabin felt. Samuel was still quiet, but even he seemed to have softened a little. He no longer looked at her with impatience. Instead, he nodded when she spoke and even brought extra firewood without being asked. A few days later, Thomas decided to ride into town to speak with the pastor. "We have to make this right," he told Clara. "People need to know what really happened." Clara was nervous but agreed. They traveled together back to the town, though she dreaded facing those who had laughed at her. When they arrived, whispers spread quickly. People stared, surprised to see her alive and well beside the mountain man's brother. The pastor welcomed them inside his small wooden church. When Thomas explained everything, the false letter, the cruel trick, and how Clara had been humiliated, the pastor's face turned red with anger. "This is shameful," he said. "Whoever did this must apologize publicly." Word spread, and soon the same people who had laughed at Clara were gathered outside the church. Their faces were full of guilt and discomfort. Clara stood beside Thomas, her head held higher than it had ever been. The pastor spoke sternly to the crowd about cruelty and the importance of compassion. One by one, the pranksters stepped forward to apologize, their laughter replaced by shame. Clara forgave them quietly. "I don't want hate in my heart," she said. "I just hope no one else is ever treated this way again." Thomas looked at her with admiration. Her forgiveness showed more strength than anger ever could. When it was time to leave, the pastor smiled kindly at them both. "You two seem to have found something special in all this pain," he said. "Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways." On the journey back to the mountains, the air felt lighter. Clara sat beside Thomas, watching the trees rush by. "I never thought a cruel joke could lead me to peace," she said softly. Thomas looked at her with warmth. "Maybe it wasn't the joke that led you, it was your heart. You kept faith in goodness even when others showed you none." Weeks passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. They laughed more, shared stories by the fire, and learned to rely on each other. Clara had become part of their mountain home, tending the garden and bringing new life into the place. Samuel even began to smile from time to time, though he'd never admit it. One bright morning, Thomas took Clara to the edge of the ridge where they could see the whole valley below. The wind brushed gently through her hair, and sunlight danced on the river far below. He turned to her and said quietly, "Clara, I don't want you to ever feel alone again. Will you stay with me?" Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from joy. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Thomas. This is where I belong." From that day on, the cabin in the mountains was no longer just a shelter. It was a home built on kindness, courage, and the power of forgiveness. Clara had come there as a frightened girl who had been the victim of cruelty, but she stayed as a woman who had found love, peace, and her place in the world. And though the town below would always remember the cruel joke that started it all, they also remembered the lesson that followed, that sometimes the kindest hearts rise from the harshest trials, and love can grow even from pain.